My 18th birthday started with my father's fist slamming against the kitchen table hard enough to crack the wood. "You're nothing, Joel. You hear me? Nothing." The words hit harder than any physical blow ever could. I stood there in our Detroit townhouse, still holding the acceptance letter from community college, the one I'd worked 2 jobs to afford. My mother, Diane, pressed herself against the refrigerator, eyes pleading for silence. My younger sister, Noreen, 12 years old, watched from the hallway with tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I just need 2 years, then I can transfer," I started, but Ronald Hayes wasn't interested in explanations. He never was. At 6'3" with shoulders that filled doorways, my father had built Hayes Industrial Solutions from nothing. He expected his son to be Harvard-bound, not clutching a letter from Wayne County Community College. 2 years. He laughed, cruel and sharp. "You think I built a $3 million company so my son could embarrass me at some nobody school?" He grabbed the letter from my hands and tore it cleanly down the middle. "You got until midnight to pack your worthlessness up and get out of my house." "Ronald, please," my mother whispered, but her voice barely carried across the room. She'd learned long ago that intervening only made things worse. The purple bruise on her wrist, barely hidden by her sleeve, told that story clearly enough. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw something I'd been denying for years. This man didn't love me. He never had. I was just another acquisition that hadn't met his expectations. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll go." I spent my first night of freedom in my car, a 1998 Honda Civic that sputtered and died every third stop sign. The Detroit winter cut through the broken heater like my father's words cut through my confidence. $23 sat in my wallet, everything I had after he'd frozen my bank account. I'd saved $1,100 from my part-time job at Murphy's Hardware, but he'd gotten to it first. Joint account. His name. His control. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Noreen. Joel, Mom's crying." She locked herself in the bathroom. Dad's downstairs drinking scotch and laughing. He's telling Uncle Kenneth how he took out the trash today. The text ended with a broken heart emoji. I wanted to drive back, kick down that door, and tell my father exactly what I thought. But what good would that do? I was broke, homeless, and completely powerless. Instead, I sent Noreen a message, "I love you. I'll be okay. Tell Mom I'll call her tomorrow." Then I drove to the one place I knew would be open, the 24-hour diner on Jefferson Avenue where my friend Dante worked the graveyard shift. "Man, you look rough," Dante said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. I told him everything. He listened, nodding occasionally, his dark eyes reflecting something I couldn't quite name. When I finished, he pulled out his phone. "My cousin Thomas owns a warehouse on the east side. Storage units. One's empty. No heat, but it's got electricity and it's yours for $200 a month. You can work it off helping with inventory on weekends." I nearly cried. "I only have $23. "Then you owe me $177, Dante said, grinning. "Plus interest, which means you're buying the beer when you get your first real paycheck." The warehouse unit smelled like motor oil and broken dreams, but it was mine. I bought a sleeping bag from Goodwill for $6 and spent the next week applying everywhere. Gas stations, restaurants, construction sites. Nobody wanted an 18-year-old with a chip on his shoulder and nowhere permanent to live. Then I met Carmen Rodriguez at the downtown library where I'd been using the computers to send resumes. She was 24, wearing a sharp business suit and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my car. "You've been here 3 days in a row," she said, sitting down next to me at the computer bank. "Same resume, same cover letter, different companies. You're doing it wrong." I bristled. "Excuse me." "Your resume reads like a high school senior's. No offense, but employers can smell desperation, and you're reeking of it." She pulled out a business card, Carmen Rodriguez, Business Development Consultant, Martinez and Associates. I mentor young professionals trying to break into corporate environments. Usually, I charge $200 an hour. But you look like you'd rather punch me than pay me, so here's the deal. You listen to what I say, rebuild that resume properly, and learn how business actually works. In exchange, you help me move some office furniture this weekend. I didn't trust her. Successful people didn't help desperate ones without an angle. What's the catch? The catch is you have to actually want to succeed, she said. Not just survive, succeed. Big difference. You got that kind of hunger in you, or did your situation kill it? Something in her eyes challenged me, dared me to prove I wasn't just another sob story. And damn it, I took that bait. Carmen wasn't joking about rebuilding my approach. Over the next 6 weeks, she tore apart everything I thought I knew about business. We met 3 times a week at the library, and she was relentless. Stop saying I need a job, she'd snap. Start saying I provide value. Employers don't care about your needs. They care about their problems and who can solve them. She taught me to research companies before applying, to tailor each resume specifically, to quantify my accomplishments even when they seemed small. You worked at Murphy's Hardware? Don't say you helped customers. Say you increased customer satisfaction scores by implementing an organized inventory system that reduced wait times. See the difference? I got my first interview at a logistics company called Premier Transport Solutions. The operations manager, a tired-looking woman named Elizabeth Gutierrez, seemed skeptical until I started talking about efficiency optimization I'd learned from Carmen. You're 18, she asked, eyebrows raised. You sound like you've been doing this for years. I've been paying attention, I said simply. She hired me on the spot at $32,000 a year, entry-level operations coordinator. I called Carmen immediately after, voice shaking. I got it. I actually got it. Of course you did, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Now comes the hard part, keeping it and climbing higher. You ready to learn about corporate politics? I thought I was ready. I had no idea how deep that game went or how useful those lessons would become. Over the next months, Carmen introduced me to people she knew, networking, she called it. One was Julian Torres, a venture capitalist who'd started with nothing. 18 months after my father kicked me out, life had stabilized. I'd moved from the warehouse into a small studio apartment in Midtown, gotten promoted to senior operations coordinator, and saved $14,000. I was making $48,000 a year now, enough to breathe, finally. Then my phone rang at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was my mother. Joel, baby, you need to come home. Her voice was thick with tears and something else, fear. Your father had a stroke. He's in ICU at Detroit receiving. The doctors say he might not make it through the night. My hand tightened around the phone. I should have felt something, concern, sadness, even relief. Instead, I felt nothing but cold calculation. Is Noreen okay? I asked. She was 14 now, and we'd kept in touch secretly through Instagram. She'd send me pictures of her artwork and tell me about school. I'd send her encouragement and the occasional $20 when I could spare it. She's scared, Joel. She keeps asking for you. Please. My mother's voice cracked completely. I thought about that purple bruise on her wrist 18 months ago. I thought about the night he threw me out like garbage. I thought about every time he'd called me worthless, stupid, a disappointment. And still, I heard myself saying, I'll be there in 30 minutes. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation. My mother looked 10 years older, her hair grayer, her shoulders more bent. Noreen ran to me immediately, burying her face in my chest. He's been asking for you, my mother whispered. He wants to apologize. I nearly laughed. Now he wants to apologize? When he's facing death? My father looked smaller in that hospital bed, tubes running from his arms, machines beeping steadily. He wasn't the giant who dominated every room anymore. He was just a scared, 62-year-old man confronting his mortality. His eyes found mine, and something flickered there, regret, maybe, or just fear. Joel, he rasped, his voice weak from the stroke. The left side of his face drooped slightly, a visible reminder that his body had betrayed him the way he'd betrayed me. Son, I was wrong. The words came slowly, painfully. I shouldn't have thrown you out. I was Too hard on you. I stood there, arms crossed, feeling nothing. My mother watched hopefully, clearly expecting some tearful reunion. But I'd learned something important over the past 18 months. You can't apologize your way out of systematic cruelty. You don't get to abuse someone for 18 years, then ask for forgiveness because you're scared. You were too hard on me. I repeated slowly. Dad, you didn't push me to be better. You destroyed me because I didn't fit your exact specifications. There's a difference. His eyes widened slightly, and I continued. You threw me out with $23 and no place to go. You froze my bank account, money I earned, because you could. Because controlling me was more important than my survival. I wanted you to be strong, he whispered. Like me. You wanted a trophy, not a son, I said flatly. But here's what's interesting. I'm strong now. Stronger than you ever were. Because I had to be. I looked at my mother, at Noreen's frightened face. I came because Mom asked. But this doesn't change anything between us. My father survived the stroke, but it left him weakened. He'd need months of physical therapy and couldn't run Hayes Industrial Solutions anymore. My mother called 3 weeks later with news I hadn't expected. Joel, the company's in trouble. Your father's business partner, Vincent Shaw, has been handling things since the stroke. But the accounts don't add up. Your father thinks Vincent's been embezzling, but he can't prove it without someone he trusts looking at the books. I should have said no. Should have let my father's empire crumble the way he tried to crumble me. But Noreen's college fund was tied up in that company. My mother's entire future depended on it. I'll look, I heard myself saying. But I'm doing this for Noreen and Mom, not him. What I found in those books over the next week made my blood run cold. Vincent Shaw wasn't just embezzling, he was systematically bankrupting Hayes Industrial Solutions. Over the past 3 years, he diverted almost $800,000 into shell companies. My father had been too proud and too trusting to notice. The company I'd been taught to revere my entire childhood was 6 months from collapse. I spent 72 hours straight digging through records, building a case. Carmen connected me with a forensic accountant who confirmed everything. But here's what my father didn't know, what nobody knew. I'd been studying corporate acquisitions obsessively for the past year. Julian Torres had been teaching me about leveraged buyouts, about how to identify undervalued companies and acquire them. And Hayes Industrial Solutions, stripped of Vincent's theft, was fundamentally solid. It was also about to be mine. I called an emergency board meeting without telling my father. 3 board members besides Vincent Shaw, Thomas Brennan, an old-school operations guy who'd been with my father for 20 years, Michelle Park, the CFO who seemed sharp but nervous, and Robert Hayes, my father's younger brother who'd always treated me like I didn't exist. I laid out everything, the embezzlement, the shell companies, the imminent bankruptcy. Vincent's face went pale, then red. This is ridiculous. You're just some kid with a grudge against your father. These accusations are, I slid a USB drive across the table. Everything's documented. Bank transfers, forged signatures, shell company registrations. I've already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They're very interested in talking to you, Vincent. The room went silent. Thomas Brennan looked like someone had gut-punched him. Ronald trusted you, he said quietly to Vincent. We all did. Vincent stood up, hands shaking. You can't prove anything. But he was already moving toward the door. Sit down, Vincent, I said, my voice carrying authority I didn't know I had. You're not leaving this building. Security's waiting outside, and they have instructions to detain you until the FBI arrives. That was a bluff. I hadn't actually called the FBI yet, but Vincent didn't know that. He sat down heavily, deflating like a balloon. The company's insolvent, I continued, turning to the board. Even with criminal charges against Vincent, Hayes Industrial Solutions is drowning in debt and damaged contracts. You have 2 choices, declare bankruptcy and sell off assets piecemeal, or accept my offer. I pulled out a contract I'd drafted with Carmen and Julian's help. I'm buying Hayes Industrial Solutions for $1, assuming all debts and liabilities. Robert Hayes laughed, actually laughed. You're going to buy this company? With what money? You're a glorified warehouse worker living in a studio apartment. I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Actually, I'm a senior operations coordinator at Premier Transport Solutions with a $92,000 salary after my latest promotion. But you're right, I don't have the capital. I looked directly at Thomas Brennan, the one board member who'd always been fair to me as a kid. That's why I've partnered with Torres Capital Group. Julian Torres is backing me with a $2 million line of credit. Michelle Park leaned forward, studying the contract. This is actually solid. You're essentially doing a distressed asset acquisition. But Joel, your father will never agree to this. Hayes Industrial Solutions is his life. My father doesn't have a choice, I said quietly. The company's articles of incorporation give the board authority to approve major transactions when the principal owner is incapacitated. My father can't even sign his own name right now. The stroke left his right hand partially paralyzed. I watched that land. I know this seems harsh. But here's the alternative: bankruptcy, liquidation, and my mother loses everything. This way, the company survives, employees keep their jobs, and my father gets to watch someone else fix what he broke. Thomas looked at me for a long moment. Your father's going to hate you for this. He already does, I said. At least this way, I'm saving 42 people's livelihoods and my mother's financial security. The vote was 3-1. Robert voted against it, calling me every name he could think of. But Thomas, Michelle, and the board's legal counsel voted yes. Vincent Shaw was arrested 2 days later. And just like that, at 19 years old, I owned my father's company. My father found out 6 days later when he was finally alert enough to understand what had happened. My mother called me, sobbing. Joel, he's having another episode. His blood pressure's through the roof. The doctors are worried about another stroke. Please, you need to come explain this to him properly. I drove to the hospital knowing this would destroy whatever microscopic chance we'd had at reconciliation. He was sitting up in bed, papers scattered around him, printed news articles about the acquisition. His face was purple with rage, veins standing out in his neck. You, he roared when he saw me, his voice stronger than it had been. You stole my company. You conniving little. I saved it, I interrupted, my voice calm. Vincent Shaw was about to bankrupt Hayes Industrial Solutions. You were 6 months from losing everything. I sat down without being invited, meeting his furious gaze. I bought it for $1 and assumed $4 million in debt and liabilities. I'm working 100-hour weeks to turn it around. I've already renegotiated 3 major contracts you were about to lose. That's my legacy. My company. I built that from nothing. And you're welcome to watch me rebuild it from bankruptcy, I said. Dad, I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because Noreen's college fund was about to disappear. Because Mom's entire future was tied up in a sinking ship. Because 42 families were about to lose their jobs before Christmas. I leaned forward. You taught me business was about results, not feelings. Remember. So here's the result. Your company survives. You just don't get credit for saving it. Get out, he whispered, his voice shaking with impotent fury. Get out of my sight. The next 18 months were brutal. I moved into an apartment closer to the company's headquarters and worked every waking hour. Carmen became my unofficial COO, handling operations while I learned manufacturing processes, supply chain logistics, and client relations. Julian Torres mentored me through the financial restructuring, teaching me about debt refinancing and operational optimization. Thomas Brennan, surprisingly, became an ally. Your father was brilliant, but stubborn, he told me one day while reviewing production schedules. He refused to modernize, refused to listen to anyone. You're actually open to learning. That's rarer than you think. I rehired the 3 employees Vincent had fired to cover his embezzlement tracks. I implemented new quality control systems that reduced defects by 37%. I personally visited every client Hayes Industrial Solutions had, rebuilding relationships my father's pride and Vincent's theft had damaged. One by one, the contracts came back. Revenue stabilized, then grew. Noreen visited the office sometimes after school, watching me work with wide eyes. She was 15 now, growing into a confident young woman. "You did it," she said one afternoon, looking around the bustling facility. "You actually saved everything." "We did it," I corrected her. "You kept me connected to this family when I had every reason to walk away. That matters, Noreen." My mother kept trying to arrange reconciliations with my father. I always declined. "Mom, I'm glad he's recovering. But he hasn't actually changed. He's just powerless now. There's a difference." She'd cry, telling me about family and forgiveness. But I'd learned something important. You don't owe your abuser a relationship just because they're blood. 2 years after the acquisition, Hayes Industrial Solutions hit $15 million in annual revenue, 5 times what it had been under my father's leadership. I'd expanded into 3 new markets, hired 20 additional employees, and paid off 60% of the inherited debt. Business magazines started calling me a turnaround specialist. Forbes did a profile, from homeless at 18 to CEO at 21, Joel Hayes' remarkable journey. My father saw the Forbes article. My mother told me he'd stared at it for an hour, not speaking, just reading it over and over. Then he demanded she arrange a meeting with me. "He wants to see what you've done with the company," she said carefully. He says he's proud, Joel." I laughed bitterly. "He's proud now? Now that I'm successful enough to validate his genetics? Where was that pride when I needed a father?" But I agreed to the meeting because I wanted him to see exactly what I'd built from the ashes of his legacy. I wanted him to understand precisely what his worthless son had accomplished. He walked into my office using a cane, moving slowly but steadily. Physical therapy had restored most of his mobility. He looked around at the renovated space, new equipment, updated computers, expanded workforce. His face went through a series of expressions I couldn't quite read. "I heard you hired back Janet Morrison," he said finally. Janet was the senior production manager Vincent had fired. "Yes. She's my VP of manufacturing now. Turns out she had ideas about efficiency improvements you never bothered to listen to. We've increased output by 45% using her systems." My father's jaw tightened. I was going to say, "The place looks good." It might have been the closest to a compliment he'd ever given me. We sat across from each other in my office, the same office he'd commanded for 30 years, and I waited for whatever apology or reconciliation speech he'd prepared. Instead, he said, "I want back in. As a consultant. I can help you grow this even bigger." And there it was. The real reason for this visit. Not pride, not reconciliation. He wanted back into the power structure. "No," I said simply. His face darkened. "Joel, I built this company, and you would have destroyed it through pride and negligence," I interrupted. "Dad, you're not here because you're proud of me. You're here because you can't stand that I succeeded without you. That I proved you wrong about everything." "That's not, it is," I said firmly. "And here's what I've realized over the past 3 years. You didn't disown me because I was worthless. You disowned me because I wasn't you. Because I dared to have my own path, my own timeline, my own dreams. And that was unacceptable to Ronald Hayes, the self-made man who needed his son to be an exact replica." I stood up, looking down at him, physically, metaphorically. "I don't hate you anymore, Dad. I just don't need your approval. I did this without you. I saved Mom and Noreen without you. I built something better than what you had, and I did it by being everything you said I couldn't be." His hand trembled on his cane. "So that's it. You're just going to keep me out of my own company." "It's not your company anymore," I said, not unkindly. "It's mine. But your pension's secure, Mom's future is protected, and Noreen's college is fully funded. I took care of this family better than you ever did." I walked to the door, opening it. "You can leave now." He stood slowly, and for just a moment, I saw something break in his eyes, the final realization that his son had surpassed him in every way that mattered. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what I said. For throwing you out. For..." Everything. I know, I said. But sorry doesn't undo damage, Dad. It just acknowledges it. I watched him walk out of my office, out of my building, and out of my story. The empire he'd built was mine now, transformed into something better. And I'd done it all by being exactly who he said I'd never be, successful, strong, and free from his shadow. If you believe in second chances earned through action, not just words, hit that subscribe button. Only people who think abusers deserve automatic forgiveness won't subscribe. Comment actions speak louder if you know that real strength comes from rebuilding, not tearing others down. And if you can't stand toxic parents who only show up when their kids succeed, hit that like button. Because nobody like Ronald Hayes deserves to claim credit for what they tried to destroy.